Hi everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer, and today we are checking out the prototype for Ada's Dream, the first game in the Great Thinker series of Alley Cat games, and this one is by designer Tony Lopez.
So Ada's Dream takes inspiration from Ada Lovelace, who was a mathematician and writer in the 1800s, and who is now kind of considered essentially the first person to recognize, the first programmer essentially, because she was the first person to recognize the potential of a computing machine to do more than just simple calculations. Now, unfortunately, Ada passed away at a fairly young age, but in this game, we're actually taking inspiration from her story and trying to create a bit of an alternative history where she gets to live longer, and we are assistants to Ada, and we're going to help her continue her work in a range of different ways, all of which will give us progress points, and obviously whoever has the most progress points by the end of the game will be the winner.
Now everyone, please remember that when we check out a prototype, it is in very early form, so the look and feel of the game could change, the components could change or probably will, and also the rule set itself might change, but this is really to give you an early indication of how it plays. Now this game is a medium heavy Euro, and essentially what you're trying to get done is you're going to be taking dice from this workshop area and putting them onto your player board, and then you're going to use those die, depending on their color, to trigger one of the four corners of the board where a lot of the main actions are going to happen. So on your turn, you get to choose from those two primary actions. There's the workshop action, and then there's the dice action that happens on your player board. So let's start with the workshop action. So imagine I want to draft a new die. I need to move one of these die from one space to another around this workshop rondelle. So if I move this white 5 die, it's going to bump a die of the same or lower value from the next space. So for example, I could bump this purple 5 die. Now you can manipulate the die values using coal, but that's a bit more complex. So let's just keep it simple. So once I bump this 5 purple out, it's going to give me the workshop bonus, but then I get to take this die and put it down into my store on my player board. Now it's going to be ready for the second primary action that I could have chosen to take, and that is to take one of your die and place it into the analytical engine. And you can place it anywhere you want to, and then it's going to trigger the part of the board that is the same color as the die. So for example, by placing this purple die, I get to activate Ada's study. And Ada's study is the area where you go to in order to get these programming tiles that are going to be objectives for the rows and columns in your analytical engine, or these engine building cards, which are the assignments that are going to give you bonuses whenever you draft die of a particular color. Now, if instead I'd played a blue, green, or yellow, noting that the dice are orange in our prototype copy, if I had activated one of those dice, I'd be able to go to these sections of the board, which are going to allow me to remove these wooden discs from my player board and place them out. And that is important, and I'll explain why later on. But let's look at the travel area. So when you activate a blue die, you're able to move your player colored meeple around these different regions, and ultimately you're trying to go to these universities to place out these discs and take the bonus and get some victory points that way. And the more you traverse the map, the more benefits you're going to unlock. If I was to activate a green die, I'd be going to institutions, and that represents traveling around to different universities to give lectures. And the same thing happens here. I would be able to remove one of these discs, and the cost to go to these spaces is in innovation, which is on your player board as well, and it's a resource that you're going to be able to collect along the way. But again, I can choose a bonus that I want to pay for, go there and collect those bonuses. And in the meeting part of the board, if I was to activate a yellow die, this is where you're going to meet with influential people. And there are 4 different meeting rooms. And again, you would be placing these wooden discs out onto the board to represent where you want to go in terms of the meeting. And that has a direct relationship based on how much it costs to go there, and then which cards you can draft. And why do you want to draft those cards? Because everyone has a partner card deck. And you're going to be kind of constructing deck building, because every time you draft one of these cards, you're going to choose one from your your hand or your discard pile that you're going to remove from the game completely. And then the new cards are going to give you victory points sometimes at the end of the game. But more importantly, you're going to be creating a deck that is going to allow you to play these optional actions whenever you draft a die of a particular value, or when you have the money to be able to pay to play the card. And these are going to give you extra bonuses that you can activate on your turn. Now, your secondary action, which is called your bonus action, is you get to publish or construct. If you publish, you get to spend books that you've collected along the way in order to publish in the region or area that you've just activated as part of your primary action. The second option is to construct, and that's where these fun little cogs come into play. When you construct, you pay the cost associated with one of these cogs, and you're going to be playing it into your analytical engine. And what are these? Well, these are going to form equations that either run from left to right in the rows or top to bottom in the columns. And they are going to make a mathematical equation. So for example, if at the end of the game, I have these placed out here and I've completed this equation, I'm going to get 4 plus 5, 9 minus 2, 7 victory points at the end of the game. So you're looking at how you can construct your die to ensure that you maximize the victory points that you're getting in these equations. And why would you ever build a minus? Well, because only equations that are complete get to score. And so sometimes you might build that out of desperation because you don't have any other cogs on hand, but also then you want to make sure the final number is as low as possible. So you're thinking about that as you're constructing your analytical engine. The other thing is that along the way, you might be able to pick up these very fancy purple cogs, which are the multiplier symbol. Now, obviously, that is going to give you a huge amount of points if you can build it into your analytical equations here. But it's limited by the amount of steam that you've been able to develop throughout the course of the game. So that's going to mean that each equation has a capped limit of the number of points it can make, and so you want to improve that along the way. Now, the game will continue until somebody's completed this analytical engine, i.e. they've placed 9 dice down into their player board. And at that point, we count up a range of points, a huge point salad across a number of different parts of the board, your cards you've collected, and how you've built up your analytical engine, and then the person with the most points will win. Now let's talk about some elements of the game that we think will dictate whether this one is right for you or not. And I want to start with the analytical engine because that is the most fascinating part of this game.
It's the core of it, yeah.
It is really core of it. It's obviously thematic, building out Ada's analytical engine, but it's also really interesting. I've not seen anything like this before, building out the different equations.
Yeah, it feels really purposeful to have those dice then be like, it's like another level of cognitive like calculations, because like not only are you kind of collecting this die and like making sure you know what they're triggering, but working out what are these equations going to be, and where do I need to place these die for that equation to be the absolute best value, but also making sure that it's going to work with other things, and that I'm going to even be able to score it, that I'm going to be able to build enough cogs to complete it.
Yeah, exactly, because the cog is a secondary action, and so along the course of the game you really have minimal turns. Let's say you've got 18 turns at a minimum if you're going to fill out your entire board and trigger the end game. And so you're constantly thinking about every turn, do I have enough resources? Because there's 2 types of resources that you're going to have to manage throughout this game, because you need those to build the cogs, and you don't want to waste a bonus secondary action by not doing a publish or construct action. And so you've got to make sure that you're collecting the cogs, collecting the right resources, and then always being opportunistic about being able to build. The other thing I really like is the relationship between that and the steam, because it's self-limiting. If I only move up by the end of the game to 15 on the steam track, well then every equation gets capped at 15, and you can get some big results here with the multipliers, where it might be 60 points
and
or
then
something.
It's all wasted if you haven't paid attention to your steam. That element is really thematic as well, because they were like the Charles Babbage, the machine that Ada was sort of so impressed and like built all of those thoughts around, was steam powered. So it's like a steam powered computer essentially. And so if you don't have enough steam, well, the calculations that it's going to be able to do are going to be fairly limited. So I love that.
And the other interactive element that you have to think about on your board is collecting these programming tiles. So at Ada's study, you get to draft one of these tiles, and these tiles have victory points and a condition that you need to meet on them. So for example, this one's worth 12 victory points and all values are less than 4. So I could look at my puzzle here and think, okay, well this one is 4, 5, 2. Maybe I'll put it here in this part of my board, and now everything in this column needs to be a value of less than 4. I do have a 5 placed here already, but that 5 throughout an action in the game can be manipulated, and maybe I will anticipate that I'll change that down to a 3, for example, just to meet this condition. And these are really, really fun because you get to place them into the board, and it also triggers a bonus when you place it there. But once you have it there, obviously now you're thinking about how does the equation that I'm building out interact with those objectives.
It's another layer of objective that you're working on, which again makes it quite brain burning. Going, wait a second, which color did I want? Because then there's the interaction with the sections that you're going to be able to trigger.
Yeah, and there's lots of different ones as well. Like for example, here's a really challenging one. You want to have consecutive ascending values in that row or column, or you want to have any values except for 1 and 6. And sometimes they relate to the colors as well. So there's a lot of variety in those programming tiles.
The other thing about this game is that it's quite a tight gameplay experience. So you kind of need to fill out this puzzle. There's a lot of things that you could do, but guarantee you're not going to be able to do all of it.
You can't do it all
in any one game. So this is going to be one of those things that you're going to have to explore and go, what am I going to be able to optimize really realistically, and also sometimes pivot based on what's happening in the game and the flow of the dice that are becoming available, or even potentially the types of cards that are becoming available. And then you have that secondary, like that kind of bonus action at the end, which is so it's so powerful, but so often it's just so painful to waste it if you go, oh, I don't actually have a cog that I can build, and so that's sort of wasted. Or I have the cogs, but I can't afford to build it. Or I've got I don't have the little publishing book that I need, and I'm exactly in the place that I wanted to be in.
So creating an optimal order of things that you're doing is really difficult in this game. And in the puzzle, we haven't mentioned, but if you fail to build cogs in here, it's going to be worth negative points at the end of the game. And so you really want to try and optimize, always leveraging that secondary action. As I mentioned, you want to build out all those cogs, and you need to do it in an efficient way, because before you can build a cog, you also need to remove these discs and put them out onto the board. So you're constantly thinking about the order of the actions you're going to take. And then on top of that, you're adding complication, because you might have a card in your hand, a partner card, that is going to give you a benefit that triggers if you draft a particular type of die. And so you might want to do that first to get that benefit. So then in the next turn, you can build the cog because you'll have the resources. So you're constantly layering and thinking about that plan. And on top of that, there are these tracks in each corner of the board that give you an advanced action that you can activate when you go to that area. And so moving up those tracks is another decision that you need to make along the way. Where am I going to prioritize? Because I'm going to focus heavily in this type of action, and then I'll get more benefits every time I do that. So the game is super laid in terms of how you're going to open up, kind of like a tech tree, your benefits that you're going to get based on where you want to specialize. And speaking of specialization, that is the fourth point we want to talk about on this game, is that it's fun because it's a point salad. You can focus slightly differently in your strategy. You can ignore one of these areas if you want to, and then focus all your energy in one part.
You can even ignore, sometimes I feel like I've tried to ignore equations and go, I'm going to try and go really strong on like the points that you get from some of the area majority stuff, so some of the objectives. And so, I feel like the more I played this, the more I realized how much there was to explore and to try out. It wasn't one of those games that, like, after two game sessions, I feel like I've kind of done everything, or you always are forced to go down this one path. So it was great to have that flexibility.
I would recommend ignoring the equations.
You would not.
I would not.
I have never won a game. Amy always has won every single game, no matter the player count that we have played this at. So, take her advice.
But it is fun to explore different areas. And there certainly are parts that you can ignore. But now let's move into some of the things that we probably want you to think about if you're trying to decide whether this is a game or not for you. And the first thing is, let's talk about the theme. So it's a very much a thematic setting.
Yeah, so I love the theme, and they actually there's a lot of thought, and I believe they worked with a consultant as well that was a specialist in the kind of like historical period and even Ada's life. So there are a lot of different elements here that, yeah, they kind of make sense. I kind of wish there was even more, and there might be more information than when the rule books are delivered. But I do like, obviously, things like the equations. I love how the little programming tiles, like they've got the little punched tiles in them and how they sit there, because it's kind of like you're entering your tile into the machine. I love that element. The rooms kind of make sense that in Ada study, the things that you'd be collecting and that you're kind of traveling around London, going to all the different universities. In the meetings, you're having getting a seat at the table, and that will either cost you money to get access to that, or have innovation that is sort of welcome, and that's how you're going to get these powerful partners. And the institutions is probably the one that's a bit more vague, because it's just like, yeah, you're kind of going
visiting
here,
there and getting some things. Yeah, but overall, I feel the game plays out in quite an abstract way.
Does,
I feel like you need to be looking for the theme, and you need to be able to understand like the different parts of it in order for it to feel thematic, because most of the time you are doing calculations in your head, you are looking at colors and numbers. So the gameplay itself, I never felt like, oh, if I do this, I'm going to please Ada, or I'm going to like, I'm actually innovating here. It doesn't feel like I'm innovating at all. It doesn't feel like I'm part of Ada's life. It just feels like it is a fairly abstract Eurogame dressed up with a very thematic setting.
Yeah. And again, like there are nice thematic elements in it, but I agree that the flow of it felt more like, symbols, equations, numbers. So the actual flow experience of the game is more of an abstract experience.
Now, the other thing we want you to think about when deciding if this is a game for you or not is the overall flow of the game, because this is not a game we would describe as a buttery smooth kind of design.
Flow,
this is a very heavy, thinky game, and every person's turn requires a number of steps that can be forgotten, and often we found ourselves even in the third or fourth game still referring to the player turn options, because there are so many optional bonus actions that you can take along the way. For example, if you're going to take a die, drafting it from the workshop, you're going to get a bonus. You have to think about whether you want to pay to change the die or to allow it to move 2 spaces. Then once you bring the die back, you're going to play a partner card out of your hand if you're able, and then you need to play out that bonus that's related with that. Then you can activate the assignments if you have them that relate to that die color, and then after all of that, you have the secondary publish or construct action at the end of every turn. That's a lot of steps, and especially if you are someone who
that's just one of the types of actions that you can do. Then there's the other type of action that is similarly like 3 or 4 different steps.
And you're trying to set yourself up for your next turn as well, so you've got to remember the exact things that you wanted to get done, and so that leads to quite a lot of AP if you are an optimizer. So Maggie had a little bit, I feel like it got a little bit frustrated, particularly at me and my sister.
A lot of waiting around if you have people that are high optimizers. Like the AP can be real, in this game.
Yeah, and the turns can be long. So we only were provided with enough things in this prototype to be able to play to a maximum of player count 3. But in a 4-player game, I think the length of the game would get quite blown out by that, particularly if you have players that are prone to AP. So if you don't like a game that has long player turns, this might not be for you. But if you like to sit there and really mull over all of the different choices and decisions, and you like that cognitive overload of trying to optimize everything in the exact right way, well, then you're going to love this. And now, just to finish, there are a few things that we'd like to see tidied up a little bit between the prototype and the final copy. One thing is that there are a few conditional rules that aren't shown on the board anywhere. For example, there are different ways that these markets get refreshed depending on whether it's part of your main action or whether it's part of a bonus action. That adds even more cognitive load when you're already trying to focus on the many, many things that you could possibly do on your turn and how to optimize for that. So there are a few of those little rules that I wish they'd just made consistent, so that you, especially in the teach, you'd be like, however, if you're doing this, then you get this particular bonus. For example, one of the publishing actions happens when you play that out, you get to activate one of your tracks. That's not shown anywhere on the board, and it's just another rule that you need to remember to teach and remember to play every time someone does that action.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that could easily be added to the board to kind of as a prompt and reminder. Yeah. The other thing is the inconsistency, and again, this is a prototype thing. A lot of the icons were inconsistent, so for the same benefit or the same thing, it was kind of represented in different ways, or sometimes in different colors, and that kind of led to a bit of confusion. But which again, obviously, that's something that we're hoping is going to be tidied up, or assuming will be tidied up as part of the development.
Yes, and those things are things that will be picked up as it's play tested more. There's also some icons that are quite similar to each other. So the looking glass and the innovation track, they look quite similar to each other. There's also the difference between when you're moving up on one of these tracks versus when you're activating one of those tracks. It's not the best iconography, and so I hope that that gets really, really tidied up and strengthened in the final copy. But that's all we have for you today. We hope that that gave you a good sense of the first of the great Thinker games in this series. Hey, maybe the next one will be about me.
We'll call that Amy's dream. The next game is going to be
but we hope that gave you a sense of whether this is a game or not for you. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.